Hi, everyone. My name is Nicole Baker. I'm an evening anchor here at CBS 11 in Dallas, and I just want to welcome everyone to a really important topic and really important, valuable discussion that we're going to have today. I'd like to welcome you to the Volunteers of America HCA Healthcare Foundation Speaker Series. This is our first one, and we're actually exploring some really deep, important topics, moral distress and moral injury among our first responders. We're going to talk about the impacts, and of course, the biggest important takeaway here is the solution. How can we make it better? Because this is an issue that is affecting every single aspect of our lives. Even if we are not a first responder, even if we don't know a first responder, there is a trickle down effect for what this means in our communities. And so we're talking a wide ranging issue here from New York to Los Angeles, a crisis that we're seeing right now. We can obviously point to a number of issues. We're just coming off the pandemic, where we're dealing with economical issues, but it goes a little bit deeper than that. I want to give you some stats here. Police departments across the country are looking at their largest exodus of officers ever. If I break it down for you, New York City saw 46% spike in resignations. And in the first quarter of this year, Seattle actually lost more officers than it hired. If we just let that settle in for a little bit, what does that leave, or what does that say about our communities and the condition that they're in and our first responders, how they're doing, how they're feeling, right? Chicago staffing hit a historic low. COVID-related protocols, high retirement rates, low recruitment rates, that's a repeated issue we've seen, and an uptick in violence, a repeated issue as well, along with the backlash against police. Those are just some of the big causes that we're seeing play into this very personal and very big issue. We go to our fire departments, we don't often think about them as often as we do our police departments, right? They are equally as important. They're getting hit as well with this issue. I want to give you more stats here. Across the country, shortages and federal teams down by 50%. Same story when we talk about our nurses and our ER staff, which is crucial right now. A survey found that 99% of rural hospitals, which is something we don't talk about often as well, are also facing some critical staffing shortages. So the big purpose of today is why. Right? How did we get here? How do we fix it? And how do we move forward? I cannot have this conversation alone. So we've got a panel of esteemed experts and wonderful just human beings all around to talk us through these issues. So we have Sheriff Marion Brown with the Dallas County Sheriff's Department. We have Assistant Chief Deputy Debbie Foster from the Dallas County Sheriff's Department as well. We've got Corey Feist, who is the Executive Director of the Lorna Breen Heroes Foundation, doing very important work. We have Reverend Ann Cansfield, who is the chaplain of the New York Fire Department. We have Chief Ron Siarnicki, Executive Director of the National Fallen Firefighters Foundation. And last but not least, we have Dr. Rita Nakashima Brock, Director of the Shay Moral Injury Center at Volunteers of America. So I'd just like to welcome all of our panelists, say hello to everyone. Thank you for being with us today. And I'm going to start with one question, and I will direct it at one of you individually, or you guys can also join in with certain comments depending on the topic. But I will start off with Dr. Brock. I'd like to ask you, Dr. Brock, because you really are an expert on something that I don't think the public really talks about that much. Maybe it's language that's used within your communities, but talk to us about what is moral distress and what are some of the factors? What causes it?
Yeah, well, having moral conflicts is a normal human experience. Sometimes we're told to do something we don't agree with, or we do something and it doesn't sit well with us. And most of us work these things out. We apologize, we talk to our boss, or we sort this stuff out. And when we can't fix it, when something goes wrong and you're bothered by it, you may start to lose sleep over it. Every time you think of it, it makes you feel lousy. It may even affect the way you do your job, that you're not as confident as you were doing it before because it's bothering you. It's like this moral thing you cannot resolve so that you can feel okay in the world and feel like everything's all right. And that is something that can't be fixed by a vacation or sleep. It's going to continue to bother you until you deal with it, because you're in distress over it. So that's really important, because if you don't deal with moral distress, it can get worse. You can have a pile up of incidences you can't fix. And it can just begin to weigh you down, or you can have a catastrophic experience like so many of us during the pandemic have had, where it's not possible to make sense out of it or get your arms around it, or you just lose control of the whole thing. And that's moral injury. That's when you're in an identity crisis. You may quit your job, give up on yourself, your life, or your family. There is a major crisis when moral injury hits. And so it's really important when you feel moral distress to find a way to relieve it, because it isn't just going to go away on its own.
Really quickly here, some people, I think a lot of people would identify with your statement saying this is not something that a vacation cures or extra sleeping in on the weekend. If someone is stuck and they don't really know where to start to get help, what's the easiest, quickest way that you direct them to help? How do they find it?
Well, I think it helps to talk to someone you trust. Somebody's not going to judge you, because if it's something you actually did yourself, it's going to be really hard to tell anybody, and you'll be afraid they won't think well of you. So you need a place where you can really sort through, talk about what happened, figure it out, and help start to process and make sense of it. Most of the time when those things bother us, we try to push them down. We might overwork or do things to avoid thinking about them, because every time we think about them, they make us feel bad. So you actually have to figure out what to do to release those feelings so that you can begin to process it. And people write about it sometimes. There are lots of ways to figure out how to do it. But you do eventually need to process by talking or doing a lot of writing.
Find somewhere to put the feelings. I gotcha.
Yep.
Sheriff Brown, I'm going to transition over to you with a question about mental health issues and maybe some of the moral distress that might be impacting your force, and kind of how it's permeating through the department. How are you seeing it settle? How are you seeing this issue settle with your force? And what do you think some of the challenges are, the biggest challenges you guys have seen in maybe the past 2.5 years or so? Oh, Sheriff, I think you're on mute. I'm so sorry. There
That's
you
okay.
go.
I'm sorry.
No,
Okay,
you're fine.
so thank you, first of all, for the invitation to participate in this discussion today, Nicole. And let me say that I must just be frank with you. When I received the invite, I had to ask someone to please look up for me, research what moral distress meant. Okay, let me just be candid with you. I didn't know what that meant. And so I needed someone to research that and tell me. Now, saying that I did not know what it meant does not mean that I might not have observed some things in the context of doing the work that we do, and maybe just not having a name attached to it, if you will. But I can tell you, and I feel safe in saying that I'm sure I'm not by myself in terms of law enforcement leadership, that we are seeing some things that we have not always seen in this industry. I have been in law enforcement for 34 years now. I can tell you that we are seeing, first of all, where people are no longer being afraid to seek out assistance. It used to be a kind of a taboo thing, if you will, in law enforcement, because, you know, if you're the law enforcement officer, then you're deemed the person to be the fixer of things. And so if you're needing someone to help fix you, you're needing the assistance, then that could have been frowned upon by your agency or perhaps by people in the community. But nowadays we see where that has changed. It is no longer taboo. Even in Girl Scouts, they say it's okay to say. And so I think that for the most part, that's where we as law enforcement are. We know now that it is okay to say. And so we're seeing where people are not afraid to seek out assistance when they need that assistance. In addition, one of the things that we are seeing is where people don't hesitate to resign or retire. Whereas in the past, law enforcement was that career that you could get in and you could stay in and you could do a good work and you could retire from there safely. But nowadays, because of the stresses that are just inherent with law enforcement, we're seeing people who are, you talked about the exodus in New York that's happening. it's not the only place. It's across the nation where we're seeing folks in law enforcement, first responders who are making the choice to retire. And some are making the choice to retire or resign and then take up another career because it does not, that career may not take on the same type of stress that they endure in their career as a first responder. So those are some of the things that we are seeing in our department, as well as other departments. Again, it's not just here locally, it's something that we're seeing across the board. And it, of course, it creates issues for us in law enforcement because we're seeking good people to come and work for us. And then at the same time, we're seeing people going out the door, if you will. They're making exodus.
Yeah, I was surprised, but I guess also not shocked about the recruitment level being kind of low nationwide for folks who, need staffing in their police departments, and they simply cannot find it because of the nuanced issues right now.
Right, and it's much, some of it has to do with what we're talking about here today, but included in there is something that you've already mentioned, and that is what we're seeing from the community in terms of hearing things like defund the police, dismantle the police departments, and that kind of thing. Those things, those are stressors that weigh on people who do the work. And so when you have a conflict within yourself because you have one group over here saying, well, defund the police. And as in my case, I say that I'm Black and I'm blue. So when you have that kind of situation, that's stress. And so, you really have to weigh whether or not you're able to deal with that and decide how do you deal with that. It's a real situation.
We're going to come back to that intersection of Black and blue. We've got a question specifically for that. But I want to move up to Reverend Cansfield and kind of pose the same question to you with your fire department. How are you seeing the moral injury and the moral distress kind of manifest with your firefighters and how you're interacting with them?
So one of the tip-offs that I use when I'm interacting with the people that I serve is there a thing that's really stuck in their craw that like their brain won't release, that's heavy on their heart, that they're thinking about, or that's weighing them down, and that's often like a big giant arrow pointing towards something that would indicate that there's a moral injury. So with EMTs and paramedics and the pandemic, the fact that it was just death after death after death, that they had to go and pronounce people in people's homes before they could even take them to the hospital. The sense that that the early days of the pandemic was such a large crisis that they couldn't even get people to the hospital. They couldn't spend as much time focusing on caring for the bereaved family and the scared family and the sick family around. In that sense of being stretched so thin, is a really like low-hanging fruit example of where there's where there could definitely be moral injury, because the people that I serve go into it to help people and to care for their communities, as a real big driver into why they go into the work in the first place. That they'll say, I mean, I'm not doing it for the money, I'm doing it for the deep sense of calling. And then when that gets disrupted, it can easily point toward a sense of moral injury happening there. I would also say that when there are incidents that could have been avoided, where especially if they point to some systemic breakdown. For example, we had a mother a day or two ago who drowned her children, and that is a major gut wrencher, and it is going to stick in the craw of many, many, many people, because in their mind it didn't have to go that way. Like, why couldn't we get her help sooner? So a lot of calls that are related to mental health and to addiction are the ones that over time can really weigh on first responders, especially when they involve, hurt or pain to other people too.
And Chief Siarnicki, if I transition over to you, I mean, you have been a longstanding member of the firefighter community in many capacities, including being a PIO for many years. And now you're the executive director of NFFF. What, from your perspective, what kind of challenges are you seeing and hearing from firefighters as well? Because I feel like this is an underrepresented conversation. I feel like the first kind of line of first responders, we talk about our doctors and our nurses, and then we talk about our police officers. I don't often hear how firefighters and other first responders are impacted as well.
Well, thank you for bringing that point up. We're all part of that public safety family.
Yeah.
And everybody has a different task and role, but unfortunately, the commonality is we often see the worst in our communities. We're called when someone is having a very bad day, and there are issues that affect life and death and have a long-term effect on that individual who witnesses that. But I think the biggest challenge out there is having the membership of the public safety organizations, whether it's fire, police, EMS, trauma nurses, or docs, is having the understanding of what we're talking about, and that it doesn't have to be a stigma associated with it. And I use the saying all the time, and TSA has it right. If you see something, say something. The people around you oftentimes get some indications there's something wrong, but they don't know what to do. And so the challenge is someone may not do some intervention, may not speak out, but also that individual needs to know that there are programs out there to provide support and assistance, and that we have to make it so that that awareness component, that there is this national issue related to the concerns with stress and behavioral health, and the trauma that we see each and every day impacts us, and that there are mechanisms to get help. But of course, the other challenge is, are there resources within that organization, that community, that hospital unit to provide that support and assistance to those individuals who do have the courage to come out and say, I need help and assistance. And that's the other challenge, getting people to say, I need help, and having them feel comfortable in doing that. And that goes back to that understanding, that goes back to that awareness, and that goes back to support from peers, people that work with them, to help them along that way. It's all kind of intertwined.
It all, I think that's the best way to put it. It's all intertwined, and everyone is a part of this one community experiencing something so intense, but that's also not being as talked about. And so if I pose kind of the similar question to Chief Foster, if we're talking about what it's like to be in the field, what do you think some of your colleagues are experiencing in that capacity as well?
Well, I would like to say that I'm not quite in the field, but I do oversee our personnel and our communication section. Sometimes the forgetful ones that are always involved are our communication, our dispatchers, and people like that see it or hear it firsthand from the people out there. So I would like to say that, it's unfortunate that this all happened. During COVID, everybody was able to stay home, but we, on the other hand, had to keep out there. So, everything perpetuates. And, I think that, yes, it is true that we are having that trouble hiring them back into the field. But I know that we do have a lot of great deputies out there, their sense of duty to service. And I must say a lot for our corrections officers as well. They take care of over 6,000 inmates, and they come to work, and yes, maybe that since these people have done a mass exodus, we've had to, unfortunately, there's some that are mandatory overtime that has happened, and things that we couldn't foresee, but yet we're doing our best to hire more people, which is also sometimes a struggle. But
Mhm.
yet, there are people that do have that sense of duty to serve, and they continue to do that. And I'm just thankful for all those people as well.
And we are too. I mean, we can only imagine what it's like for you guys. We hear about it, we report it, but you guys are living it. You guys are still going to work every day in a space where it is not easy to get people to come back to work. So we really do appreciate that. Dr. Brock, you kind of gave us the general definition of moral distress and kind of laid out what it means, how it manifests, how it shows up. But to all first responders that might be listening, how do they self-identify it? They may think there's something off or something. It's like it's like trying to tell if you have COVID or a cold. It's like
it's a little like that.
which you know what I'm saying? How do they
I think
self-identify?
I think people respond to moral stress in different ways. Some
Mhm.
people may just not sleep well. They
Mm.
may, it just that they're just not able to completely relax, is the thing that's bothering them, that they're keeping down, is taking a lot of effort. So I think if you notice that your sleep is not good, it's not, you may be being disturbed by some kind of moral distress. Some people drink a little more alcohol or use something to kind of numb themselves out. Other people may overwork. They may just stay really, really busy so they don't have to think about it and work to exhaustion. And I think that's not good self-care. So if you're working way too hard, you might want to ask yourself, what's under that? What's going on? Because you're not good for others when you're not at your best yourself, if you're not fully rested and you're working too hard. And I know that during the pandemic, people had to work extra shifts and long hours. So it isn't always hard work that is an avoidance. Sometimes it's just necessary. But I think you just have to trust your own guts and your own sense that I don't feel quite right. I don't feel like myself, like my very best self, and what's behind that. And sometimes it's not always clear. I know plenty of people who've had moral distress and they had to talk for a while before they finally got to the thing that was really bothering them, because it's so buried that if you're afraid you dredge it up, it'll take over. And actually it's already taken over. You just can't see it.
That is the most succinct definition. Is people get so scared that it's going to consume them, but they don't realize it's already there.
It's already affecting them.
Yeah. You touched briefly on self-care. What does that look like for a first responder, do you think? Because they may not have time. They may think of it as something frivolous when it's not, because I feel like that term has been thrown around so frequently and everyone has a different definition.
I wish there were a different term than self-care, because if you're not good yourself, if you haven't slept well and your mind isn't sharp and alert and your spirit isn't lifted, it affects everybody around you. So self-care is other care as well. It's wanting to do your very best so that you take care of yourself, so that you can. And for different people, it's different things. For some people, it's getting enough exercise. For some, it's getting time to relax. And meditation is often really, really helpful. And sleep is essential.
I love that. Those are all, we can all apply some of that. Corey, I want to get to you, because I know this is a deeply personal cause for you, especially when we're talking about Dr. Lorna Breen, the Heroes Foundation. We're talking about your awareness and trying to focus specifically or particularly in the healthcare professionals when we're talking about moral distress. Could you, and I know this is sensitive and I know it's heartfelt and close to you. Can you share a little bit about Dr. Breen's story and how your foundation is kind of working to make it safe for other healthcare professionals to share their struggles and get help?
Absolutely. And first, I just want to really appreciate all my co-panelists. It has been amazing listening to you all, and we're all in this together. It's really amazing how similar everyone's stories are. So we're going to add the layer, which are the frontline workforce in the healthcare industry. And really what I'm here to share with you, and thanks for teeing that up. Dr. Lorna Breen was my sister-in-law, and she's the namesake of the foundation that we created in response to what we heard from the healthcare workforce after she passed away. Lorna was the director of the emergency department at Columbia Presbyterian's Allen Hospital. Over the span of 3 weeks in the spring of 2020, Lorna treated really an overwhelming, relentless number of incredibly sick patients. She and her colleagues worked around the clock with limited PPE, insufficient supplies, not enough oxygen, not enough beds, and just not enough help. What she and her colleagues experienced was more patients dying in their waiting rooms in their care than they'd ever seen before. Lorna contracted the COVID virus herself, and she did that at the end of March. And April 1st was her first day back to work. She was really, really depleted and probably still very sick. She just didn't have a fever, but she wanted to go back because she was committed to run back into the fire, like so many first responders are. And when she realized very quickly she couldn't keep up, she immediately called us and said that she was concerned that it would hurt her professional reputation. And, you know, nonetheless, we said, take a break, go home. She said, no, I'm pushing this through. And she pushed forward like so many do. I mean, I used the analogy recently that, you know, we spread ourselves so thin like peanut butter on the bread, but finally the bread gets to a point where it breaks. And that's what happened. Lorna, after about 9 days, needed to be hospitalized for all of a sudden her own distress. You know, she answered the call for her city, for her country, but like so many healthcare workers, when she needed to make a call to seek care for herself, she put it off because she was worried it would end her career, the career she basically wanted to engage in since middle school. You know, Lorna died by suicide April 26, 2020. And I would share with you just briefly that after she died, even though I was in the healthcare industry over 20 years, and Jennifer, my wife, her sister, and the whole family was in healthcare. Jennifer is a lawyer, but everyone else, she was the outlier. Everyone was in healthcare, nurses and doctors. But what we learned was that the suicide rate among physicians and nurses is twice that of the normal population. And hopefully we can talk about National Physician Suicide Awareness Day, which is coming up September 17th. But just to know that this day and this condition existed way before the pandemic. And so Lorna had one risk factor for suicide. It was that she was a doctor. And I'll just end by saying that over the last 28 months, since we created our foundation, we have raised awareness on these issues. We have reached over 200 million people with the story, and we have worked on national legislation, the first of its kind, actually named after Lorna, called the Dr. Lorna Breen Healthcare Provider Protection Act, which was signed by President Biden into law on March 18th. We got to go to the Oval Office and watch him sign this law that benefits, you know, thousands and thousands of healthcare workers. So we've got a lot more work that we've been doing, but maybe end by saying that we are here to help guide the healthcare community and the healthcare workforce to develop comprehensive solutions to these issues, and really invite anyone in this community to join us in trying to help heal healthcare together.
Well, first of all, thank you for sharing that story. Because I hadn't heard, we talked about this briefly before, I had not heard this perspective ever about the threat that it poses to our doctors and our nurses. And of course, I apologize. I'm sorry for your loss. I know it's hard, and it's the reason you're motivated every day to inform all of us and bring awareness. Do you feel like, and this is not something I knew about as a journalist who's curious, I didn't know about the threat that getting help for doctors can pose to their livelihood and honestly their emotional well-being. If they're worried about their livelihood and they feel called to do something in life and they feel like I might not be able to do this if I get help, do you think this issue overall is being talked about enough?
It's certainly not being talked about enough. It's definitely being talked about more. And one of the things that we learned, and we would encourage anyone who's experienced either suicide or just mental health to talk about it, because what we learned early was that when the unspeakable happens to you and you speak about it, what it does is it gives others courage to speak up too. So we need to create a whole echo chamber of conversations here. And what we've learned and what we've heard from just sharing the news is that it's made an impact. I mean, I'll tell you, just before this panel today, I was on the phone with a physician in Florida who shared with me that 4 of her colleagues died in a very short period of time by suicide this summer, and that she was able to, frankly, save a 5th in a really heroic effort. But she shared with me that the importance of talking about these issues, which still kind of get hidden. When doctors die by suicide, nurses talk about suicide, or really anyone dies by suicide, there's not that conversation, and there's an immediate kind of ostracism. And it's not like when you learn as a parent early, you become a junior pediatrician because you talk to other parents about these random conditions that your kid has. It's the exact opposite of that. Nobody talks about it. So there's not a community of support immediately when your family's in crisis. And so I think that for the healthcare industry, this needs to be as public a conversation as possible, because what it's going to do is it's going to shine a light from the outside in so that they can recognize very clearly that something needs to change. Because while it was news to us as a family, and while it was news to you, within the healthcare industry, this has been one of those hidden kind of secrets that people just don't talk about. It's one of my favorite workout instructors says, when you brush things under the rug, all you get is a lumpy rug. That's 100% what's happened. Is we've got like a Mount Everest of a rug here on this issue, and we need to smooth this out.
So to your point, everyone on here can say, hey, speak up, ask for help.
Yeah.
One of the questions we got is, what is the best way? It says officers and fire emergency personnel, but for anyone in this arena working, what do you think is a practical way? Sometimes people need the how, even though they have the what. So the what is speak up and ask for help. Do you have a practical solution as to the how? I know you said there needs to be a better community of support, and this question isn't just for Corey, it could be for anyone. Do you have a practical way or a practical protocol for folks to say, this is who I need to call, this is what I need to do, and this is the way I should do it for it to work for me?
Yeah, the first thing I would say, and I'd love to hear others, is we need to create a culture of peer support across all these groups where it's okay to ask for help. And we've talked about this a couple times. And there's an emergency medicine physician in New York who told me this a long time ago. He's actually one of the co-founders of National Physician Suicide Awareness Day. He said what he does is called the double tap. He calls it the double tap. He's clearly in marketing, not really. He taps somebody on the shoulder, said, "How you doing?" And then when they say fine, they say, "No, how are you really doing?" And it's really those very small interventions that create the private conversation, which I think is really a way to begin this work. And then, everyone needs to now know 988. Everyone knows 911, but does everyone know 988? Because, we're shifting a lot of burden on people who are full of stigma, like, oh my gosh, does this person who's talking to me really rise to a level of really needing an intervention? And what I would say to you, particularly from a family member who had this experience and was many states away from our loved one, don't wait, just make a call and intervene. And so creating regular patterns of checking in, whether it's the double tap or whatever. And then when you're concerned about someone, it's much more, I'd much rather have the awkward conversation on the other side. Wow, I'm sorry I called this number or whatever, because I was concerned about you, rather than like in our experience, we couldn't have a conversation because she was gone.
I think that's really, 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 really good advice. Does anyone else want to jump in on that question before I move to the next one?
I would like to. This is Rita. We received, Volunteers America has received funding from HCA Foundation to create an online peer support specialist program for first responders. And this actually webinar is part of the launch of that program. But it's VOA REST, VOA REST with the number 4, and then first responders. And it's just an hour online with others who just need time to process. And the people who facilitate the sessions are peers. So they're not there as mental health evaluators, they're not there to fix anything. They're really there to validate people's feelings, believe them, and support them in being able to express the kind of things they're carrying, to unload some of that burden of emotional and moral distress. And they're free and they're available to all first responders.
The best part is that it's free and that it's online, which makes it
Yeah.
very accessible. This is a
National,
follow-up
yeah.
question for you, Dr. Brock.
I think Christine can or Ann can put in the chat where the link
Okay.
is. There it is. Yeah.
I think the
So
link's actually in there.
it's there. Yeah.
Okay,
So,
perfect.
and we offer that because we know it's the pandemic especially, but just being a first responder is a really challenging and it's worthwhile and valuable, but it's a really challenging kind of work.
A follow-up question for you, Dr. Brock, is how do
Mhm.
we reach and help the first responders who have either resigned or retired, who take all the moral injuries and moral distress with them when they leave the profession?
They're also able to use this program. So if you've ever been a first responder, you can join the groups and talk about your past experiences. You don't have to be an active first responder. And a number of the people facilitating the program are former first responders. They're not active right now. So, but it really helps if you can find someone you trust to talk about your experience, even if you're no longer doing the job now. Because those things don't go away. It's I knew an Air Force veteran that sat on his Air Force experience for 40 years. He'd only been in the Air Force for 4 years. And then for 40, he'd done other work and done pretty well and had a decent life. And then in his 70s, it just landed on him like a ton of bricks, his Air Force service. So you don't want to delay it because it's not like it goes away. And you may cope and you may make a new life and move on, but if you're still carrying that distress, it's really good idea to unload it. And it can be alleviated. It really can.
I think that's the main point is it's never too late to ask for help or to heal. And I think people need to remember that for sure. I want to get.
If
Oh,
I
yes.
might, Sheriff Brown, I just want to mention that this is important to the degree that the state of Texas has mandated and implemented a peer-to-peer network as well for law enforcement, so that we can have a place where folks can go and talk to someone. And it may not be someone local, it may be someone across the state that you talk to, but a peer, if you will, someone to visit and talk to you and listen to you about what you're going through. Also, here at our department, we have recently onboarded a psychologist, an in-house psychologist, for the purpose of being available to our employees. This is not the psychologist who will be the pre-employment psychologist who does a report back to your department. This is for the purpose of our employees being okay to say that they need assistance and being able to go and seek out assistance without repercussions for doing so.
I think that's important. I did see that was some breaking news that we learned about. How do you think that's going to help your department, like, feel safe, not just with themselves, but with their colleagues as well? How do you think that will help?
Oh, I think it's going to be a tremendous help in that they won't have to be concerned that that person will report back to us. Because when we are trying to hire someone and we send them to the psychologist, then that psychologist is incumbent to send us the information. In this instance, that's not what this is about. This is about where they can go and be in a safe space and talk about what it is that they want to talk about without being concerned that that report's going to come back to us. That's the whole purpose of it.
Yeah, I think that'll be monumental, especially with the next question I'm going to ask you. So we've seen law enforcement kind of deal with and respond to multiple incidents of racism. Most of the time they played out very publicly. Most of the time there's video. Most of the time there's some sort of visual or open component that makes it very, very easy for people to give their opinion and people kind of rain down with however they feel. Tell me how your department is handling these type of incidents internally, and maybe is there any sort of kind of moral distress among your force with seeing these stories play out so publicly?
Well, let me say that in terms of our force, we have, as Chief Foster mentioned earlier, we have a very professional staff here. And I think that what we do is we take what we know to be right. We have our core values, and we don't just say this is what we represent. It is something that we live by day to day. We talk about it on a regular basis to remind people that this is what we're about. And so professionalism is a part of that whole core value system. And so when we have issues that relate to racism, because we are human, then they may give us pause and cause us to stop for a moment and think. But I am confident that the men and women who represent Dallas County Sheriff's Department is the only one I can speak for, but I am confident that they do what is necessary in terms of whatever it is, having to, put in the back of your mind any kind of overt racism that you might encounter and do the job that you're sworn to do.
Mm-hmm. You spoke earlier about the intersection of being Black and blue, and you're a woman. I mean, what are the challenges that you see from your perspective, dealing with that every day when you hear things like defund the police, when you hear certain narratives that may not be in line with what you feel your department is doing?
What I try to do is use my experiences as a like you said, a female who is a minority female who grew up in what we now call underserved. We used to just say poor, but now we say it's underserved, in an underserved community. And I try to take those experiences and I try to relay those experiences to people so that they have a better understanding that just because you seeing one package one way does not necessarily mean that it fits into the stereotype that maybe we are accustomed to seeing or hearing about. So there are challenges, but I always say when people ask me, well, how do you overcome being the Black female in charge? Well, I say I do what I know to be right in here and in here. And that's what pushes me.
Got it. I love that. I love that. All right, Sheriff, I'll give you a little bit of break. I'll give you a little bit of break. I want to ask Ms. Foster the same question if you'd like to add anything to that. Otherwise, I have a question for Dr. Brock as we move into solutions here.
No, no, the sheriff's right. We obviously a female does bring a different perspective to the position as a whole, law enforcement. But it's interesting that most of our employees in our corrections, in our jail, are female. And so I think it lessens, the response from inmates, and they just know how to deal with people very well, I might add. And I think, Sheriff Brown said it very well, that, we just do what we have to do.
I love it. Okay, let's see. I want to make sure I didn't forget. Okay, I did not forget a question. I want to go back to Dr. Brock as we kind of transition into solutions here. And I know we'll talk more about that in a subsequent panel. But you talked about developing ReST for first responders and the program. You talked about the grant from HCA, which is major. ReST stands actually for resilience, strength, time. And like you said, it's the online peer support group that's accessible. Tell us how it's happening or how it's working. And I guess how it's working, how it's succeeding, and then what you think the consequences could be if first responders are not actually getting the help that they really need in these situations.
Yeah, the program is relatively new. We did a very slow, soft launch, so we've had some groups meeting, and we have a little survey at the end to see how people experienced it. And so far, the feedback we've gotten from people who've participated is that it's very helpful to them. So that's good feedback. But I think it's really important to keep reminding ourselves that moral distress and the more severe moral injury that can come from too much moral distress are not disorders. They're a human response to catastrophic conditions or to morally disturbing situations. And so one of the things that's become clear in the veterans populations where a lot of the work's been done on this, and our program is actually based on a very successful veterans program we started 5 years ago. So it's really important to note that not all mental health professionals know anything about moral injury or moral distress. And there's clear evidence that a mental health provider may have someone they're working with who looks like they might have a disorder, when in fact what they have is moral injury. And the symptoms can look similar to PTSD or some other sort of disorder like depression, but really the response is appropriate to the reality that someone's experienced. And if the mental health provider has some protocols that normally aren't used by mental health providers that will help people process their moral distress, it will be that if they actually have also a disorder, the disorder treatment will be improved because you address the moral distress. And it's also true that sometimes the best person to be handling this isn't a mental health provider, but a chaplain who doesn't report diagnoses and doesn't have to say anything about the conversations they have with people. But I know a lot of chaplains who have been studying the moral injury space because it's in some sense their bailiwick. Every religious tradition has some way of understanding people's sense of moral failure. And I thought actually Ann Cansfield is the fire department of New York. She's our one chaplain, might have something to say about that, because I know she's been doing some moral injury work with her firefighters.
Yeah, I'd love to hear from Reverend Cansfield. And Dr. Brock, that's such a fair point, because how many people have you talked to that say, I don't, for whatever reason, therapy is outside of their scope of comfort, whether it's their religion, whether it's just opening up to someone like that. But if you do give people the freedom to talk to someone that is not a mental health professional, and Reverend Cansfield, you might be able to speak to this, there might be a different level of comfort or acceptance or openness that comes in having that person take ownership of how they're getting help, and not just doing it one way, which is go see a therapist or get on medication or whatever it may be. Are you seeing any sort of progress in how you're approaching the issue as a chaplain?
So, I mean, I think that there's actually just as I believe that there's an inner sense of moral decency, which is at the core of moral injury, there's also some innate sense in alleviating some of this pain that I think people do, particularly among their peers and their friends when they trust one another. And in that sense of like, well, what do you say? So I don't think you necessarily need to be a super trained psychologist in order to be able to go and help in this situation. My personal move is there's a good double tap, and then the double tap follow up, which is, ooh, that's messed up.
Mm-hmm.
And I Ron, you're shaking your head. I mean, I would say, I would use a different vocabulary depending on which firehouse I was in, if you catch my drift. But like, if you say that, that's another tip off of moral injury. But having that echoed by somebody who understands,
Yeah,
I think can make all the difference. So somebody where they're not just saying it to say it, but they actually really know, like, ooh, that was wrong. That really hurts your soul.
Mhm.
That hurts my soul to even hear that you had to experience that. Just mirroring back that sense of morality and moral decency. And I love the way that some of the folks that I've interacted with just light up when I'm like, this doesn't point to a mental illness in you. It points to a human realness. Like, this is because you're human that you're feeling this way. Not that it's a dysfunction, but it's actually a true function. Like, we want to have people who are moral, deeply caring people who live out their values in a world that is fallen and broken, where we don't all have the opportunity to live out our values, and that, lousy things happen. Like, sin is real, is what I would say in the spiritual world, but like, there are other phrases that really work with that. And being able to be really present with people and just mirror that back, I think as a peer, or a chaplain or a friend, can make a huge world of difference. And just explaining moral injury,
Yeah,
I think can really, can just be life-changing for folks.
I think it's the relatability and the sense of comfort, that knowing that someone else in a similar situation knows exactly what you're talking about. And even if you can't find the words for the thing, it's like, I feel it, I know it. And I think that's what you're probably experiencing. We are winding down time. We have a few more moments. And before we go, I do want to give Chief Siarnicki and Corey a chance to jump in here and kind of give your final thoughts on best solutions, viable solutions for our first responders, and how you see ReST working, how you see ReST probably opening the horizon for folks to feel comfortable and come together and get help.
Well, thank you. And as I've been listening, the discussions that Dr. Brock said about a lot of work that was done within the military, there has been a great deal of effort put there, and programs like Stress First Aid and others that have come out of that really are based upon what the chaplain's talking about, that peer component. And one of the things within the fire service and all of public safety, that someone has a tragic loss, and then a stranger comes up and says, I know how you feel. Well, if you haven't been down that road, you don't.
Mm.
And so that's the piece about peers, at least within the fire community. We talk about that discussion at the kitchen table, and that other firefighters who are there with that individual have some components and kind of in their back pocket to recognize some of the problems that are going on. But also there's an element related to self-awareness. And there are some great programs out there that do self-screening and encourage people to say something if they're having issues. And all of that, though, falls upon the organization's commitment to get the resources to their membership, however that membership organizational structure might be, fire, police, EMTs, doctors, nurses, to say, hey, look, this is a human element. These are things that happen. You're not going to get in trouble for this. We want to help you because you're a vital team member. And we have to provide the resources to to make it better for them to continue to perform and get through these moral issues. And that's a critical component, a commitment organizationally with resources to make a difference. And there's a bunch of different models. There's local peers. Of course, this program that's being done with a web-based application is phenomenal, because sometimes people don't want to talk to, a person they know. They may want outreach. But I think the bottom line is, and I think it was stated, not everybody needs medication. Not everybody needs a psychiatrist or psychologist. It should be ratcheted up as needed. So you start with a peer or a chaplain, and you start with someone within your structure. And then the key is, so those individuals know, when do we need to bump this up one more level, or is this something that we can address with what tools we have in our toolbox?
It's not one size fits all. Corey, I gotta let you have I gotta let you get in here. Oh, sorry. Chief Siarnicki, did you have something else to say?
Oh, sorry.
No, I was going to say that it sounds a lot like the Heroes program, and that's why I was going to tee him up for you.
Oh, thank you. No pressure if I'm the last one here. I want to go back to something that Reverend Cansfield said about, kind of walking a day in someone's shoes and being empathetic and really present with them. I think that's what peer support programs do. This program is incredible for that reason. It's exactly what the workforce in healthcare is asking for over and over again, and it's what they need. Many of them, as we talked before this call and has happened to Lorna, are fearful for the confidential nature of the programs, that particularly when the programs are inside their hospital system. And so by having this just a phone call away, yet someone who's walked a day in their shoes is exactly what the healthcare workforce is asking for over and over again. So I'm just so grateful to be a part of this. We as a foundation are so grateful to be a part of it. And thanks to HCA and Volunteers of America for pulling this off, because it is going to really hit a massive need right exactly in the sweet spot now. So thanks for that. All I can do is put a lot of exclamation points on this. And thank you all for being here, and thanks for having me be a part of this.
Yeah, I echo that. I want to thank all of you for taking time to have a really, I think, important, emotional, poignant, valuable conversation about how we move forward together. Because if we're not taking care of our first responders, we're not taking care of our communities, because they are the backbone. You guys are the backbone. Who do we call when we need help? So I just want to thank you guys for your contributions to today's conversation. I want to thank you guys for having me as well. Just a reminder, this is our first panel, so I'm sure there will be other subsequent conversations as ReST grows. And it's really been exciting to hear about the program, where it started and how it's growing and how important it is. So I just want to thank everyone for being here today and contributing all of your perspectives to our conversation.